Ah, the 1980s. This was the decade of Walkmans, Nintendo, and Billie Jean. A time when the NES was the only thing that mattered on a Saturday morning, and you spent more time blowing into the cartridge than actually playing the game. I'll be honest here, I didn't live a single second of the 1980s. By the time I showed up, the decade was already over and everyone had already moved on. But I will say this, after the amount of research I put into this video, I feel like I aged about 15 years. And when it comes to basketball, the 80s are not just remembered. They're worshipped to a whole generation of fans. This was the golden era, the most dramatic, physical, star-driven stretch the league has ever seen. They call it the Rivalry era. But to those who lived through it, it was something bigger than any label. This wasn't just a shift in the game. It was the decade that single-handedly saved it, because the NBA coming into the 80s was in serious trouble. Ratings were in the tank. The league's reputation was taking hits from every direction. Finals games were being broadcast on tape delay because the networks didn't think enough people would stay up to watch. But then everything changed. Bird and Magic arrived. The Showtime Lakers lit up arenas from coast to coast. The bad boys in Detroit made the entire league miserable. And a kid from North Carolina was quietly becoming something the sport had never seen before. Scoring was different. They weren't attempting 53s a night. Most times they barely attempt 5. Big men ruled the paint. Games were slower, more physical, more personal. You could grab, bump, and bully opponents in ways that would draw 5 flagrant foul calls today. The rivalries were personal. The basketball was brutal. And the stories were so good that people are still arguing about them 40 years later. This wasn't just a decade, it was war. And if you saw our last few videos, you already know we broke down the 90s, the 2000s, the 2010s, and even the 2020s so far. But today, we're going all the way back to where it all started. The decade that built everything that came after it. And now we're telling that story. This is a full recap of the 1980s. To truly understand where the NBA stood in 1979, you have to understand how bad things had gotten. The league was in serious trouble. The ratings were down. Teams were folding or just simply relocating. The New Orleans Jazz packed up and moved to Salt Lake City. The Buffalo Braves became the San Diego Clippers. The league was quietly hemorrhaging. And on the court, the 1978-1979 season belonged to Seattle. The Supersonics won the championship over the Washington Bullets in 5 games. It was a good series. It just wasn't a story that anyone was going to remember 10 years later. On March 26, 1979, Michigan State met Indiana State in the NCAA championship game. It drew a 24.1 Nielsen rating, still the highest ever for a basketball game in American history. Magic Johnson Spartans beat Larry Bird Sycamore 75-64. Bird shot 7 of 21. He sat on the bench at the end with a towel over his head, crying. And Magic was named Most Outstanding Player and smiled through every trophy photo. That summer, the NBA draft separated them onto opposite coasts. Magic to the Los Angeles Lakers and Bird to the Boston Celtics. And the decade that was about to begin suddenly had its 2 main characters. The NBA was a completely different game in 1979. As I said, post moves, big men, that was it. The three-point line had just been adopted from the ABA, and nobody really trusted it yet. Chris Ford of the Boston Celtics hit the first official three-pointer in league history on October 12, 1979, and it barely registered as news. Nobody in the entire world knew what that little arc painted on the floor was going to eventually do to the sport. What did register was what happened when Magic Johnson and Larry Bird walked onto the NBA floors for the first ever time. Bird's impact on Boston was immediate and almost impossible to believe. The Celtics had gone 29-53 this season before. With Bird, they went 61-21, a 32-game turnaround on one of the greatest single-season improvements in league history. He transformed Boston's entire identity overnight. The Celtics were relevant again. The Garden was loud again, and Bird was doing things that made basketball people stop and stare. He read the game differently than everyone else. He knew where the ball was going before it got there, and he was mean about it in the best way possible. Out in Los Angeles, Magic joined a team that already had Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the most unstoppable offensive force the game had ever seen. Jerry Buss had just purchased the franchise the previous summer for $67.5 million, which at the time was the biggest sports deal of its era. For some reference, the Buss family just sold the Lakers for $10 billion. What an investment. He immediately said that he was going to turn the Lakers into a Hollywood spectacle, from Laker girls to the Forum Club, all the way down to Jack Nicholson still sitting courtside. It was showtime before anyone called it that. There was also a coaching crisis early in the season when head coach Jack McKinney suffered a near-fatal bicycle accident just 13 games in, and assistant Paul Westhead took over. The Lakers barely broke stride. That alone tells you everything about how talented that roster really was. Let's go back east. The Philadelphia 76ers were the other major force in the league that season. Julius Erving, Sterling, also known as Dr. J, was at the peak of his powers, making the game look like something it wasn't supposed to look like. They went 59-23 and were the class of the Eastern Conference. And while we're talking about this first season, you know, the pressure that these guys played through under every single night, the mental weight of carrying a franchise, of having an entire city, sometimes state, on your back. It's a good reminder that stress and overload are real things. And most people in this world, especially men, don't really know how to handle it. I know that firsthand because of my fiance. She used BetterHelp, who's also sponsoring today's video. A couple years ago, she needed to talk to a professional on how to manage stress when she was in her undergraduate of school. And her therapist taught her tools that she still uses to this day. Not just that, she ended up passing all of that information onto me. You know, things like recognizing when you're taking on too much responsibility, how to manage stress before it manages you, and of course, how to decompress rather than actually just pushing through it. If you've been thinking about starting therapy, but you haven't pulled the trigger yet, BetterHelp makes it a lot easier to get started. You get matched with a licensed therapist quickly, and you can communicate with them however you want, whether it's a video, text, or a call. And if they end up not being the right fit, don't worry about it. You can switch at no extra cost. Over 6 million people have gotten help through BetterHelp, earning them a 4.8 out of 5 rating on the App Store. So be sure to click the link in the description or go to betterhelp.com/JZUncut to get 10% off your first month of therapy. The link is down below. Thank you so much again to BetterHelp for sponsoring today's video. Let's get back to the 80s. Daryl Dawkins, the self-proclaimed Chocolate Thunder, was their starting center and was busy shattering backboards across the league. And I mean that literally. He actually broke 2 in a span of 3 weeks that November, which led the NBA to install breakaway rims league-wide because of him. Dawkins named every dunk he threw down and gave interviews like he was running for mayor. In a league desperately searching for personalities, he was one of the most entertaining humans in the sport. Down south in San Antonio, George Gervin was doing something almost nobody outside of Texas was even paying attention to. The Iceman was averaging over 33 points a game and winning his 3rd consecutive scoring title. He was one of the most gifted pure scorers the league had ever produced, a man who can get a bucket in ways that defied logic, and he was doing it completely in the shadow of what was happening in Boston and Los Angeles. Seattle was the defending champion coming into the season, and they were still very much a contender. Dennis Johnson was one of the best two-way guards in the league. Gus Williams was electric. They had the pedigree and they had the talent, but something felt slightly off from the jump. And by the time the playoffs arrived, it was clear that their window was closing faster than anybody expected. Before we get to All-Star Weekend, I want to talk about the Midwest. The Kansas City Kings were quietly putting together one of the more underrated seasons in the conference. Otis Birdsong was scoring at will. Phil Ford was running the offense. They finished 47-35 and gave people legitimate problems in the first round before eventually bowing out. Nobody talked about them much then. And to be honest, nobody talks about them much now. All-Star Weekend was held in Washington, D.C. And while the game itself was entertaining, 2 rookies on opposite coasts were quietly changing the entire conversation around the NBA. Attendance was up in Boston and Los Angeles. People were tuning in specifically to watch these 2 kids play. For a league that had been bleeding viewers for years, it was the first real sign that something had shifted. In the playoffs, Philadelphia dominated the East, rolling past Washington and then beating Boston in 5 games in the conference semifinals. Dr. J was magnificent and the Sixers were rolling.
And Dr. J, he's been brilliant.
Out west, the Lakers carved through Phoenix and then the defending champion Sonics to reach the finals. Kareem was an absolute force of nature.
Cook in the game, Jeff Cook. What a shot by Jabbar.
By the time Los Angeles took a 3-2 series lead over Philadelphia, it looked like the championship was theirs to close out. And then Kareem sprained his ankle so badly in Game 5 that he couldn't make the trip to Philadelphia for Game 6.
He was going to left. Kareem's hurt. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is hurt. He pulled something coming around.
Nobody gave the Lakers a chance. They were on the road without their best player, going up against Julius Erving and a desperate Sixers team that knew that this was their moment. But then Magic Johnson sat in Kareem's first row seat on the team plane, winked at Coach Paul Westhead, and said, "Never fear, EJ is here."
You have played every position this year, and it's been a remarkable season for you.
Yes, it has. It's been a learning experience, but I enjoy challenges, and it's a challenge tonight to see what I can do.
Magic Johnson was a point guard, but for Game 6, he started at center and also played power forward and shooting guard. You get the idea. In that game, he played everything, and he also did everything.
Magic will come down the baseline, and Dawkins tied him up. Score it and send Magic to the line. 2 fouls on Dawkins.
Magic pulled up to a must-win game without their best player and scored 42 points, grabbed 15 rebounds, while also dishing out 7 assists and getting 3 steals. This guy even shot 14 for 14 from the free throw line. The Lakers ended up winning 123-107.
We'll talk to Magic Johnson. There it is. It's over, and the most valuable player is Magic Johnson.
Magic Johnson became the first and still only rookie in NBA history to go out and win the Finals MVP award. He was 20 years old. He had just played every position on the floor in a clinching Finals game on the road without their best player in the world. And yeah, you guessed it. He was smiling through that entire game. Los Angeles had a new face, and the city knew it. For Kareem, it was his first championship since Milwaukee in 1971. 9 years of waiting finally over. He had one MVP. He had dominated the series. And even though Magic stole the moment in Game 6, Kareem didn't seem to mind. He understood better than anyone that a championship was a championship. For Philadelphia, the loss stung in a way that was hard to articulate. They had Dr. J. They had the home court advantage for Game 6, and they still couldn't close it out. The Sixers had been to the finals twice in 3 years now, and nothing to show for it. That hunger was going to eat that franchise for the next few years. And don't worry, they're going to do something about it. And just to remind y'all, that final Game 6 of the NBA season aired on tape delay at 11:30 p.m. on CBS in most markets, after reruns of Dallas and Dukes of Hazzard, of course. That's where the NBA stood in 1980. One of the greatest individual performances in finals history, and millions of people missed it in real time because the networks didn't think anybody wanted to stay up to watch. That's gonna change pretty soon. Now, for the conclusion of our first season, let's talk about all the individual accolades. Defensive Player of the Year and Sixth Man weren't added until 1983, so for now, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar took home the MVP. Larry Bird claimed Rookie of the Year. Magic Johnson earned Finals MVP, and Bill Fitch was recognized as Coach of the Year. The 1979-1980 season was a statement. Two franchises had been reborn overnight. Two rookies had announced themselves to the entire world, and the rivalry that would define the next 10 years was just getting started. Bird may have won the Rookie of the Year, but Magic won the championship, and neither one of them was even close to being done yet. Boston and Los Angeles, Bird and Magic. The stage was set for the future, but for now, Magic had the last laugh.
This is your first year and you're here. How many more of these would you like to get under your belt?
About 20.
The defending champion Lakers came into the season with a significant problem right away. Magic Johnson tore the cartilage in his left knee and missed 45 games. For a team built around his energy and pace, losing him for more than half a season was a serious blow. Kareem was still Kareem, still one of the most dominant forces in the game, but the Lakers without Magic were a fundamentally different team. They finished 54-28, respectable on paper, but clearly not operating at the level that had made them champions. Before the season even tipped off, the summer produced one of the most lopsided trades in NBA history, and almost nobody realized it at the time. Red Auerbach of the Boston Celtics had the first and 13th pick in the 1980 draft and sent them both to the Golden State Warriors in exchange for the third pick and center Robert Parrish. Golden State used the first pick on Purdue center Joe Barry Carroll, who would go on to be nicknamed Joe Barely Cares. That's so mean. The Celtics used the third pick on Kevin McHale out of Minnesota. And just like that, in a single afternoon, Boston added two future Hall of Famers to a front court that already had Larry Bird and Cedric Maxwell. It's still widely considered one of the most one-sided trades the league has ever seen. Utah took Darrell Griffith second overall, an explosive leaping guard out of Louisville who went on to win Rookie of the Year and gave the Jazz an identity that had been searching for since relocating from New Orleans. Philadelphia also added Andrew Toney with the 8th pick, a shooting guard who could score from anywhere on the floor, and opponents would eventually nickname him the Boston Strangler for the damage he specifically did to the Celtics in big moments. And buried in the second round, Washington quietly selected a 6'10" power forward out of Hampton University named Rick Mahorn, 35th overall. Nobody paid much attention to that pick at the time, but don't worry, that'll come up later. This was also the season the Dallas Mavericks joined the league as its 23rd franchise. And the NBA, of course, used the expansion as an opportunity to do some geographic reshuffling. Houston and San Antonio were moved from the Eastern Conference to the Western Conference, and Milwaukee and Chicago were also shifted east. It was a cleaner, more logical alignment, and it set the conference structures that would largely define the rest of the decade. On the court, Boston was the story. The Bird, Parrish, McHale front court was brand new and still figuring itself out. But what was emerging was already something so special. Parrish was a fluid, silent force who seemed to glide through the paint without much effort. McHale was developing a post game with so many counters and so much footwork that opposing bigs genuinely had no answer for him.
Blocked by McHale. That's a major league rejection.
And Bird was doing what Bird always did. Orchestrating all of it, setting everyone up, reading the game 2 plays ahead of everyone else, and then punishing you the moment you looked away. And Philadelphia was still trucking. Julius Erving was still one of the most captivating players in the world. Bobby Jones was one of the best defensive players in the league. And with Toney now in the fold, the Sixers had real depth. They finished tied with Boston at 62-20, though the Celtics earned the division title by virtue of their head-to-head record. Both teams knew that a collision was inevitable. Out west, George Gervin in San Antonio was still getting buckets, quietly putting up scoring numbers that should have had the entire country talking about him. The Spurs finished 52-30 and were a legitimate threat in the Western Conference. Moses Malone in Houston was one of the most physically punishing forces in basketball, a relentless rebounder and post scorer who could carry a team on his back. The problem was the team he had to carry. Houston finished the regular season 40-42, barely squeezing into the playoffs on the final night when Golden State lost to Seattle, giving the Rockets the last playoff spot in the West. Nobody expected much from them, and well, that was a mistake. Calvin Murphy was quietly having a remarkable season for Houston as well, the shortest player in the league at that time, sinking 78 consecutive free throws to break Rick Barry's previous mark and finishing the season 95.8% from the line, also breaking Rick Barry's record. For a team that needed every edge it could find, Murphy was a quietly invaluable piece. All-Star Weekend was held at the Richfield Coliseum near Cleveland in February, and the game itself was a showcase for what the league was becoming. The East won 123-120. Nate Archibald of the Celtics won MVP honors with just 9 points and 9 assists, but it was his mastery of the game's tempo that stood out. Robert Parrish, in his first All-Star appearance, had 16 points and 10 rebounds. Magic was absent with his knee injury, still months away from returning. That weekend was quiet by later standards, with no dunk contest or three-point contest yet. Those were still a few years away. In the playoffs, the Lakers ran into the Houston Rockets in the first round and paid for the regular season struggles. Moses Malone was a man possessed.
And there is Billy Bones. Rebound, Moses Malone. He's horsing the boards. That basket will count, and he's been fouled.
He scored 38 points and grabbed 23 rebounds in game one as Houston stole the opener on the road. Magic, still not fully himself after the knee injury, could not provide the lift needed.
Magic Johnson with it. Here come the Lakers trying to run it. Broken up by Calvin Murphy. Murphy will head to the other end.
Houston won the series 2-1. Ending the defending champion season before it barely got started. Boston swept Chicago in the first round and then walked into what would become one of the most dramatic playoff series of the decade. The Philadelphia 76ers, hungry and motivated, jumped out to a 3-1 series lead over the Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals.
Intercepted by Bobby Jones, and the game is over. Bobby Jones intercepted the pass. Boston did not call timeout.
It looked finished. It looked like Philly was finally breaking through. And then, well, Larry Bird decided to take over. Game after game, he dragged Boston back. He outscored Dr. J by 7 whole points per game. He shot 89% from the free throw line in the most pressure-packed moments. And in game 7, with the Celtics trailing in the final minute, Bird hit the go-ahead jumper, came up with 2 late steals, and grabbed a crucial defensive rebound to seal a 91-90 win.
1:05 to go. Larry Bird pulls up, and the Celtics lead.
5 of 7 games in that series were decided by 2 points or fewer. It's still considered one of the greatest playoff series ever played. I highly recommend you go back and watch this series. Meanwhile, Houston was doing the impossible out west. They knocked off San Antonio in 7 brutal games, with Calvin Murphy exploding for 42 points in the decisive Game 7. Then they beat the Kansas City Kings in the Western Conference Finals, a matchup so improbable that both of the teams had finished the regular season with identical 40-42 records. Houston was going to the finals having barely qualified for the playoffs, becoming only the second team in league history to reach a championship round with a losing record. Moses had been calling the shots the whole way. Before the series even began, he told anyone who would listen that the Celtics were chumps. Boston was unimpressed. You're gonna find out from this video if you don't know much about Moses Malone, but he was a dog. Game 1 of the finals of the Boston Garden was tight the whole way through. Houston led 87-84 late in the fourth quarter when Bird launched an 18-footer from the right side. The moment it left his hand, he knew it was off. He sprinted to the baseline, caught his own rebound in midair as his momentum was carrying him out of bounds. The Garden erupted. Red Auerbach called it the greatest play he had ever seen. Boston won 98-95. Houston battled back and ended up winning games 2 and 4 to keep things interesting. In the clinching game 6, with Houston making a furious late comeback run, Bird personally killed the rally, hitting a mid-range jumper, finding Maxwell for a bucket, and then drilling a 24-foot three-pointer to put it away for good. Boston had their 14th championship.
I think Fitch, Harry, the ball players, they all came through. I'm so proud of them, like any other championship.
For Bird, this title meant everything. He was 24 years old, just 2 seasons into his NBA career, and already had a championship ring. He had come into the league with enormous expectations and had delivered on every single one of them. For Boston, this was a restoration of identity. The Celtics were supposed to win championships. After a decade without one, it felt right again. And the frightening part for the rest of the league was that the Bird, Parrish, McHale front court was still getting started. For Houston, this loss was not a bitter one. Nobody expected them to be there in the first place. Moses Malone had dragged a below 500 team to the finals on sheer force of will and had been extraordinary doing it. The Rockets left knowing that they needed more around him, and the organization would spend the next 2 years trying to figure that out. Now for the seasonal awards. Julius Erving was named the league's most valuable player. Darrell Griffith took home the Rookie of the Year. Cedric Maxwell earned Finals MVP, and Jack McKinney was recognized as Coach of the Year. The 1980-81 season confirmed what everyone was starting to feel. Boston was back, and they had the pieces to stay that way. Bird, Parrish, and McHale were just now finding each other, and the scariest part for the rest of the league was that it was only going to get better.
We played the game the way the Celtics are supposed to play. Got to be the happiest moment of our life. Rick, I have a ring like you now.
All right, ready to go.
Okay,
Great job. Nice going.
Coming off of their first championship of the Bird era, Boston was the team everyone had to beat. But the offseason brought a draft class that would quietly reshape the league for years to come. Dallas used the first overall pick on Mark Aguirre out of DePaul, a gifted, versatile scorer who can get a bucket from anywhere on the court. Detroit was next and selected Isiah Thomas out of Indiana University, a 6'1" point guard from the west side of Chicago who had left school after just his sophomore year. Thomas played with ferocity and competitiveness that immediately stood out. Nobody in that draft room knew about it yet, but they had just selected the engine of the next great dynasty. New Jersey took Buck Williams 3rd overall out of Maryland, a hard-nosed power forward who could rebound, defend, and bring toughness to whatever team he played for. Williams won Rookie of the Year and gave the Nets an identity that had been lacking for years. Tom Chambers went 8th to San Diego. Rolando Blackman went 9th to Dallas. Larry Nance went 20th to Phoenix. And deep in the second round, Boston selected a guard out of BYU named Danny Ainge at pick 31. Nobody paid much attention to that pick either, but don't worry, they will. The biggest story of the entire season happened 11 games in. Magic Johnson, frustrated with Paul Westhead's slow, half-court offensive system, went public with his frustration after a win over the Utah Jazz. Standing in front of reporters, he said, "I can't play here anymore. I want to leave. I want to be traded. I can't deal with it no more. I've got to go." He was asked if Westhead was the reason. He didn't hesitate. He said, "Yeah, we don't see eye to eye on a lot of things. It's time for me to go." The backlash was immediate. Magic was booed everywhere he went, including his own building. 7-Up even pulled his endorsement commercials. Letters poured into the Los Angeles Times, and 33 out of the first 45 published were anti-Magic. Jerry Buss fired Westhead the next day and held one of the most chaotic press conferences in franchise history, announcing Jerry West as offensive coach alongside Pat Riley. West came to the podium and clarified that Riley was in fact the head coach and that he himself would simply provide support.
First of all, I'd like to clear up one thing. I'm going to be working for Pat Riley.
An arrangement that lasted about 12 games before West stepped back entirely. Pat Riley had never been a head coach at any level. He had gone from former player to broadcaster to Westhead's assistant. Now he was running the Los Angeles Lakers, and he was about to show the world exactly who he was. The Lakers went 50-21 the rest of the season under Riley, finishing 57-25. The pace was different. The energy was different. The fast break that Magic had been begging for was now the identity of the team. Showtime wasn't just a nickname anymore. It was becoming a way of life.
Straight down the middle. Still going, still going.
Now, out east, Boston was even better. The Celtics won a league-high 63 games and were the most dominant team in basketball from wire to wire. Bird was Bird. Parrish was an immovable force in the front court. McHale was developing to something genuinely terrifying in the post. And the Celtics had depth. They had toughness. And they had the best player on the planet at his absolute peak.
Is the man. Ball away.
Oh, wow. Oh, he wanted that one, boy. He gave the little pump signal.
Philadelphia was right there too, finishing 58-24. Dr. J was still one of the most captivating players in the game. Andrew Toney was becoming a nightmare for opposing defenses, and the Sixers were hungry after back-to-back playoff disappointments. They had unfinished business, and everybody knew it. Out in Houston, Moses Malone was putting together one of the greatest individual seasons of the era and ended up winning MVP for the second time. The Rockets were still built around him. In Detroit, Isiah Thomas was making his presence felt immediately as a rookie. He was small, but fearless, attacking bigger defenders without any hesitation, making passes that left crowds confused about how he had even seen the opening. Detroit was still years away from contention, but Zeke was giving the city a reason to pay attention again. Back out west, Denver was doing something that had never been done before and has never been done since. The Nuggets scored at least 100 points in every single game of the season, while also allowing at least 100 points in every single game. Imagine that, an entire season without a single defensive or offensive anomaly. It remains one of the most unique statistical achievements in NBA history. On March 6, 1982, San Antonio and Milwaukee played a game that set the record for the most combined points ever in an NBA contest. The Spurs beat the Bucks 171 to 166 in triple overtime. It was the kind of game that only happens a few times in a generation, and the building was completely unhinged by the end of it. This was also the season breakaway rims became standard equipment across the entire league, a direct consequence of Daryl Dawkins having shattered 2 backboards the previous year. The days of a rim that could be destroyed were over. Well, until a certain somebody came into the NBA, but that's in my 90s video. Be sure to check that out after. On Christmas Eve of 1981, the Lakers made a quiet move that almost nobody noticed at the time. Mitch Kupchak had gone down with a serious knee injury, and Los Angeles needed front court depth. They acquired Bob McAdoo from the New Jersey Nets for a second-round pick. McAdoo was 30 years old, had bounced through several teams after a brilliant individual run in Buffalo, and many around the league had simply written him off. He had won 3 consecutive scoring titles. He had won an MVP. He made all-star teams, but his teams had never gone anywhere in the playoffs, and his reputation as a selfish player had followed him everywhere. So the Lakers ended up giving him a chance, and he wouldn't waste it. All-Star Weekend was held at the brand new arena in New Jersey, the first season the New Jersey Nets called it home. The East won 120 to 118 in a close, entertaining game. Larry Bird took MVP honors with a dominant fourth quarter, scoring 12 of the East's final 15 points. It was the kind of clutch takeover performance that Bird had already made his signature. Isiah Thomas, in his first All-Star appearance as a rookie, scored 15 points and showed the national audience exactly what Detroit had selected. In the playoffs, the Lakers were a simply different animal under Riley. They swept Phoenix in the Western Conference semis and then swept San Antonio in the Western Conference finals, going 12-2 through the entire bracket heading into the finals. That kind of dominance was stunning. Philadelphia had their own drama to navigate in the East. The Sixers had blown a 3-1 series lead to Boston the year before and were not going to let that happen again. They built a 3-1 lead on the Celtics again in the Eastern Conference finals, and this time, they didn't let go. Andrew Toney scored 33 points in the decisive Game 7, and as time wound down in the Boston Garden with Philadelphia pulling away, something remarkable happened. The Boston crowd, knowing their team was done, began chanting "Beat LA, beat LA."
To the Special Olympics on behalf of Julius Erving.
It was a moment that said everything about how much that city hated the Lakers. Philadelphia was going to the NBA Finals. The 1982 NBA Finals was a rematch of 1980. Lakers vs. Sixers, and Los Angeles won again in 6 games. The Sixers gave them moments of resistance, but can never sustain it. Bob McAdoo, the forgotten man who had gotten a call on Christmas Eve, averaged almost 17 points per game coming off the bench throughout the entire playoffs. He was reborn as a player. He said after the series that this was the happiest moment of his entire life.
LA wants to run. That's their style, and they do it so well because they have so many good passers. McAdoo hits. Bob McAdoo.
In the clinching Game 6, Magic Johnson was everywhere. 13 points, 13 rebounds, 13 assists, a perfect triple-double to close it out. He was named Finals MVP for his 2nd time, the youngest player ever to win it twice. He did this just a few months before his 23rd birthday. It was the first NBA Finals where every single game was televised live. No more tape delay. The league had finally arrived.
3, 2, 1. The Lakers are the world champions.
For Magic and the Lakers, this championship was about redemption and validation all at once. The chaos of November, the booing in their own building, the weeks of being called a villain, all of it dissolved the moment the confetti fell. Riley had taken a fractured situation and built something beautiful out of it in less than a full season. Magic had gone from the most unpopular player in the league to a champion in a matter of months. Showtime was real, and it was only getting started. For Philadelphia, losing to the Lakers again was crushing. They had the talent. They had the hunger. They had Dr. J, they had Tony, they had a team that still believed it could win. But Moses Malone was still in Houston, and the Sixers had watched him win MVP again from a distance. They knew exactly what they needed. Now, for the seasonal awards, Moses Malone claimed the league's MVP. Buck Williams earned Rookie of the Year. Magic Johnson took home his 2nd Finals MVP, and Gene Shue was recognized as the Coach of the Year. The 1981-82 season cemented Pat Riley as one of the great coaches in the game and announced to the rest of the NBA that Showtime was here to stay. Boston had the best record in the league. Los Angeles, though, had the championship, and Philadelphia was quietly plotting the move that would change everything.
Magic, congratulations. Tell me what Bob McAdoo has meant to this team.
Just a big weapon. I tell you, I'm just glad that we had him on our team.
All right.
Philadelphia had watched Los Angeles celebrate 2 championships in 3 years, and they were done watching. The offseason move that defined the entire season happened before training camp even opened. Moses Malone, the reigning league MVP, played out the final year of his contract in Houston and became a restricted free agent. The 76ers signed him to a 6-year, $13.2 million offer sheet on September 2nd, crafting it with clauses the Rockets couldn't practically match. Houston exercised its right of first refusal, matched the offer, and then turned him around and traded him anyway. Malone walked into his introductory press conference in Philadelphia and said, "I know it's Dr. J's show, and I'm happy to be a part of Doc's show, but maybe now it'll be a better show." Billy Cunningham looked on and knew his franchise had just become the favorite to win the title before a single game had been played. The 1982 draft has also reshaped the landscape headed into the next season. The Lakers held the first overall pick, a remarkable circumstance for the defending champion. Los Angeles used that pick on James Worthy out of North Carolina, a smooth dynamic forward with an instinct for the big moment. He averaged 14 points and shot nearly 58% from the field as a rookie and was a revelation in the Showtime system. Terry Cummings went second to San Diego and also won Rookie of the Year. He was one of the most physical players and made him one of the most exciting young men in the conference. Third overall was Dominique Wilkins out of Georgia, originally drafted by Utah and immediately traded to Atlanta. He was a player so explosive and so naturally gifted above the rim that anyone who watched him practice knew they were looking at something rare. The human highlight film hadn't fully arrived yet, but he was coming. On the court, Philadelphia was suffocating from the opening tip. With Malone alongside Julius Erving, Maurice Cheeks, Bobby Jones, and Andrew Toney, the Sixers were built in every direction. They could score in waves, defend with tenacity, rebound everything, and impose their will on any team in any style. They went 65-17, the best record in the league by a significant margin, and their point differential was one of the most dominant the NBA had seen in years. They were no longer a team that was going to sneak up on anyone. Instead, they were coming through that front door. The Lakers went 58-25 and were still a force. Showtime was in full flight under Pat Riley, and Magic Johnson was at the height of his powers. Kareem was Kareem, we all know that. The roster had depth and continuity and the kind of confidence that comes from winning back-to-back conference titles. And then, James Worthy broke his leg. On April 10th, landing awkwardly after a failed tap against the Phoenix Suns, Worthy fractured his tibia and was done for the year. It happened 5 games before the end of the regular season. The Lakers had just lost their most promising young piece headed into the playoffs, and the timing could not have been any worse. Boston was still formidable at 56-26, still anchored by Bird and Parrish and McHale, still the kind of team that made opponents think twice. But Milwaukee was emerging, and they were a legitimate threat in the East, with Sidney Moncrief becoming one of the best two-way players in the conference and Marquise Johnson giving them the scoring punch at the forward spot. Out in San Antonio, George Gervin was still one of the most fluid scorers in the game. Denver under head coach Doug Moe was playing at a pace that made everyone in the building dizzy, with Alex English leading what would become the highest scoring team of the decade. The Western Conference had legitimate talent at multiple levels, but nobody was stopping what Philadelphia had built out east. All-Star Weekend landed at the Forum in Inglewood in February, and before the game even tipped off, something happened that nobody in the building ever forgot. Marvin Gaye walked onto the floor, accompanied by nothing but a drum machine, and delivered a version of the national anthem that stopped time. He stretched it, slowed it down, made it soul, made it his. Players on both benches stood there with their mouths open. Nobody had heard the song performed like that before. And just a bit later, the East won the game 132-123. Julius Erving put on a 25-point showcase and won MVP honors for the second time in his career, doing it in front of a Lakers crowd that had every reason to be pulling for the West. Magic had 17 points and 16 assists and gave the Forum faithful plenty to cheer about. But the night belonged to Dr. J and to Marvin Gaye. In the playoffs, Philadelphia was a runaway train. Moses Malone had made a prediction before the postseason started when asked about how many games each round would take. His answer was simple: foe. A sweep of the entire playoffs. The Sixers went out and swept the New York Knicks and then knocked off Milwaukee in 5 games. Moses outscored himself round after round, and Irving provided the moments that made people remember why they fell in love with basketball in the first place. The Lakers navigated past Portland and San Antonio to reach the finals, going through the Western bracket without Worthy and leaning on Kareem and Magic to carry the load. It was a true testament to show how good they really were, even without James Worthy. But Philadelphia was waiting, and Philadelphia was a whole different kind of problem. The 1983 NBA Finals was a statement sweep. Moses Malone out-rebounded Kareem Abdul-Jabbar 72-30 for the entire series. The Sixers won all 4 games and barely broke a sweat doing it. Los Angeles was missing Worthy and Norm Nixon, and Bob McAdoo spent significant stretches of the series compromised. But even if they were at full strength, it's pretty hard to imagine them solving what Philadelphia had constructed. Moses was a force of nature. With 59 seconds left in Game 4, Irving made a 3-point play to seal it, and the Sixers finally had their championship. Billy Cunningham stood at center court and said simply, the difference from last year was Moses. And you know what? This has to be said. As a 28-year-old, before studying the 80s extensively, I was told that Bird and Magic owned this decade. So I have a question to everyone who lived through it. Why does Moses Malone not get the credit that he deserves? After watching a bunch of his games and highlights and looking at the stat sheets, why is Moses Malone so disrespected when people talk about their top 10 players of all time? Let me know in the comment section down below, because I'm genuinely curious. For Philadelphia, this title was the culmination of years of heartbreak and near misses. Dr. J had come to the city in 1976 with a championship as the expectation. He had taken the Sixers to 3 finals in 6 years and had left all 3 of them empty-handed. This one was for him. It was for the city that had waited. The prediction ended up as 4-5-4 rather than the clean sweep that Moses had promised.
We're a strong team, and I thought we could go 4-4-4. But against Milwaukee, the 5th game, that they got more aggressive than us.
But the result was still the same. Philadelphia was the best team on the planet, and they had proved it in the most convincing fashion possible. For the Lakers, the sweep was a humbling reminder that talent and system alone don't guarantee anything in the postseason. They had been caught without their pieces at the wrong moment, and a team built for exactly this kind of moment had taken everything from them. It wouldn't take long for Los Angeles to respond. Now for the seasonal awards. Moses Malone was presented with his 3rd MVP trophy and Finals MVP. Terry Cummings claimed Rookie of the Year. Sidney Moncrief took home the very first Defensive Player of the Year award. Bobby Jones earned the first ever 6th Man of the Year. And Don Nelson was honored as Coach of the Year. The 1982-83 season belonged entirely to Philadelphia. Moses Malone had transformed a very good team into an all-time great one, and the city celebrated accordingly. But the league was already shifting again. And as we all know, the NBA landscape doesn't wait for anyone. The league looked different already just headed into the next season. The playoff format was overhauled entirely. 8 teams per conference would now qualify instead of 6. First round byes were eliminated, and every series from the opening round forward was a best of 5. For the first time in league history, a team had to win 4 consecutive series to claim a championship. The stage was bigger. The margin for error was smaller. And off the court, the most significant development was the changing of the guard at the very top. Larry O'Brien, the commissioner who had presided over the ABA merger and guided the league through its most turbulent years, had stepped down. His replacement was a sharp, aggressive 41-year-old named David Stern, who had been serving as the league's executive vice president. David Stern took over on April 1st, 1984, and the NBA would never be the same. He immediately went to work on broadcast deals, licensing revenue, new strict rules, and global marketing with an intensity and vision the sport had never seen from a front office. The trophy was also renamed the Larry O'Brien Championship Trophy in honor of the outgoing commissioner, a fitting tribute to the man who had helped keep the league alive through its darkest years. The 1983 draft was interesting in many ways. Ralph Sampson, the 7'4" center out of Virginia who had been the most hyped college prospect since Kareem, went 1st overall to Houston and ended up winning Rookie of the Year. Portland took Clyde Drexler 14th overall, a fluid, explosive guard out of the University of Houston. Drexler was just beginning to scratch the surface of what he was capable of, averaging modest numbers off the bench in his rookie year. But anyone paying attention could see his ceiling. He was going to be a problem for people very soon. Boston was the team to beat from October. With Casey Jones installed as the head coach after Bill Fitch departed the previous summer, the Celtics rolled to 62 wins and took the Atlantic Division by 10 games over the defending champion 76ers. Bird was at his absolute peak. Parrish was immovable. McHale's postgame had evolved into something opposing coaches genuinely lost sleep over. The Celtics also had Dennis Johnson running the point with intelligence and defensive ferocity. And of course, a supporting cast that believed in exactly one thing. They were the best team in basketball, and they all knew it. Philadelphia won 52 games and was still loaded. Moses Malone was still terrifying. Dr. J was still spectacular. But when the expanded playoff format threw them into the first round series against the New Jersey Nets, things went sideways fast. The Nets won every road game in the series and eliminated the defending champions in just 5 games. It was one of the great upsets of the decade, and it effectively ended Philadelphia's championship window, at least for the moment. Out in Los Angeles, the Lakers went 54-25 with a fully healthy roster, including a second-year James Worthy, who had come back from his fractured leg and slotted right back into Showtime.
Worthy indeed. Gives to Kareem. Here he comes. Slam dunk. Oh, Worthy set that up so beautifully.
Kareem was doing something remarkable for a 37-year-old, not just competing, but producing at a level that defied logic. And on April 5th, he passed Wilt Chamberlain to become the all-time leading scorer in NBA history.
Kareem swing left, right hand, 12-footer.
The record-breaking shot was a skyhook, naturally fed to him by Magic Johnson near the baseline. The arena erupted. David Stern came to center court and called him one of the greatest athletes ever to play the game. Wilt Chamberlain himself said afterwards, "If someone's going to take your record, I think you gotta feel good about who it is." Kareem ended up finishing that night with 22 points, and the record stood at 31,420 points. And the crazy part about that was that Kareem wasn't done yet. That record would stand for decades to come. Isiah Thomas was becoming a genuine problem for the rest of the league. In his third season, he was blossoming into one of the most dangerous point guards in the game, a player who could take over in an instant and whose competitive drive matched anyone's in the sport. The Pistons were still a few pieces away from contention, but Isiah was already the kind of player that made opponents game plan specifically for him.
Guys I'm playing against, I'm better than him, and I know I'm better than he is, and he knows I'm better than he is.
Down south in San Antonio, George Gervin was still the Iceman, still silky, still putting up crazy numbers. Denver under Doug Moe was playing with a freewheeling offensive game. Alex English was quietly assembling one of the most underappreciated scoring runs in the Western Conference. And in Utah, the Jazz made the playoffs for the first time in franchise history, beginning a streak of 20 consecutive postseason appearances that would define the next 2 decades of the franchise. On December 13th, Detroit visited Denver and the two teams played the highest scoring game in NBA history. The Pistons won 186-184 in triple overtime. It was basketball as pure chaos, a game that felt like it would never end, and a score that still looks like a typo 4 decades later. All-Star Weekend landed at McNichols Sports Arena in Denver, and the occasion marked the debut of the Slam Dunk Contest. Larry Nance of the Phoenix Suns won the inaugural competition and gave the league a glimpse of what the event was about to become. The actual game saw the East beat the West 154-145, and Isiah Thomas took MVP honors with a dazzling creative performance alongside Magic Johnson that reminded everyone why Detroit's young point guard is one of the most electric players in the sport.
This is the greatest, because on this day, it says that I was the best basketball player in the world, and that's a lot.
Let's move into the playoffs. The Celtics methodically handled Washington and then survived a 7-game series against the Knicks in the second round before dismantling Milwaukee in the conference finals. Los Angeles swept through the West, dropping only 3 games across the entire bracket. And for the first time since 1969, the NBA Finals would feature the 2 franchises that had defined this decade: Celtics versus Lakers, Bird versus Magic, Boston Garden versus the Forum. The series everyone had been waiting for. Game 1 ended up going to Los Angeles, 115-109 at the Garden. Game 2 was where the series truly began. The Lakers led 113-111 with 18 seconds left when James Worthy, trying to inbound the ball, threw a telegraphed cross-court pass that Gerald Henderson read perfectly. He picked it off and converted into a tying layup. Boston ended up winning in overtime, 124-121. James Worthy sat in the locker room afterwards, unable to explain what just happened. Game 3 in Los Angeles was a bloodbath. Lakers by 33. Magic dished out 21 assists and the Forum was delirious. Bird was furious. He walked into the visitors' locker room and told the assembled press that his team played like sissies, then turned around and challenged his teammates to respond.
We got some great players on this team, but we don't have the players with the heart sometimes that we need. And until we get our hearts where they belong, we're in trouble.
Game 4 was where the rivalry got physical in a way that nobody forgot. Kevin McHale, chasing down Kurt Rambis on a breakaway layup, clotheslined him at full speed. It was brutal and a flagrant, but it was also a message from Boston that they were done playing nice. The Lakers had a 5-point lead late in the fourth quarter and should have closed it out. Instead, Magic committed a critical turnover. And then with the game tied in overtime and 34 seconds left, he stepped to the line for 2 free throws that would have given the Lakers the lead. He missed both of them. The Garden crowd was merciless. Celtics fans started chanting Tragic Johnson, a nickname that stuck to him like a scar for the entire offseason. Boston won 129-125. Magic said that he cried in the shower for 30 minutes after the game. Game 5 at the Garden became known forever as the Heat game. There was no air conditioning in the building.
The game started over 97 degrees here at Boston Garden inside, and I'm sure that's been raised a few degrees. It is hot and steamy. It's a sauna bath here at Boston Garden.
Boston was in the grip of a summer heat wave, and the temperature inside reached 97 degrees. Kareem was visibly cramping. Magic looked drained. Larry Bird looked like he was playing in his backyard in French Lick. He scored 34 points on 15 of 20 shooting, pulled down 17 rebounds, and afterwards told the reporters, "I play in this stuff all the time back home. It's like this all summer long." Boston won 121-103. The Lakers took Game 6 back in Los Angeles to even at 3. Game 7 at the Garden was the moment. Cedric Maxwell, the quiet veteran who had won Finals MVP back in '81, walked up to his teammates before tip-off and told them to jump on his back. And he delivered 24 points, 8 rebounds, and 8 assists. The Celtics won 111-102, and Boston had their 15th championship. Bird was named Finals MVP. For the Celtics, this title completed what Bird's arrival had promised. Casey Jones had come in and let the players be themselves. And what those players produced was the best team in the world. Bird was 27 years old, entering his prime, and had just won his first ever league MVP as well as his first finals MVP. The dynasty was humming, and there was every reason to believe that this was not their last banner going up at the Garden. For Los Angeles, losing to Boston in 7 games was the kind of pain that doesn't go away. They had been the better team at various points in the series. They had Kareem at the all-time scoring throne, Magic at his creative peak, Worthy back and healthy, and a system under Riley that had already won 2 championships. But Boston had taken it from them, and that debt would sit with them until they could settle it. They were going to think about this moment all summer long. Now for the seasonal awards. Larry Bird claimed his first ever MVP award. Ralph Sampson earned Rookie of the Year. Bird also took home Finals MVP. Sidney Moncrief was recognized as Defensive Player of the Year for the 2nd straight season. Kevin McHale won 6-man, and Frank Layden was honored as Coach of the Year. The 1983-84 season gave the decade its defining rivalry, finally delivered to the final stage for the first time, and the summer that followed dropped one of the most consequential draft classes in NBA history. A towering center from Nigeria who would anchor a franchise for the next 2 decades. A quiet point guard from Gonzaga nobody was talking about would quietly rewrite every record in the books. None of these guys were the story. The story was about a skinny kid from North Carolina, the 3rd pick overall, who walked into his first NBA practice and made every single person in the building stop what they were doing. There was something different about him, something in the way he moved, the way he competed, the way he looked at every defender like a problem he was already solving. Nobody had quite seen it before. They were about to. Going into the next season, Magic Johnson had spent the entire summer of 1984 crying. In his own words, he said he cried for 3 months because he felt personally responsible for losing the championship to Boston. The turnovers, the missed free throws, Tragic Johnson. That nickname was going to follow him until he did something about it. He walked into training camp with a look in his eye that his teammates described as different. Pat Riley recognized it immediately. The entire franchise recognized it. Los Angeles was coming for Boston, and everyone in that building knew it. The offseason also brought a draft class that the league was still trying to fully process. Houston had taken Hakeem Olajuwon 1st overall, pairing him with Ralph Sampson, 2 of the tallest players in the league sharing the same front court. Chicago took Michael Jordan 3rd. Philadelphia took Charles Barkley 5th. Utah selected John Stockton at 16th. The ripple effects of that single afternoon in June 1984 would be felt for the next 15 years. Michael Jordan walked into the Chicago Bulls organization and immediately made everyone around him stop and stare. He led the Bulls in scoring, rebounds, assists, and steals as a rookie. No player in NBA history has ever led their team in all 4 categories in the same season. He averaged over 28 points, 6.5 rebounds, and 6 assists coming out of nowhere and dragged a Bulls team that had no business being in the playoffs into the postseason. The city of Chicago, which had been largely indifferent to the Bulls for years, suddenly couldn't get enough. Within a month of his debut, he was on the cover of Sports Illustrated. Within a season, he had changed the entire energy of a franchise. He was only 21 years old and already one of the most electrifying players that have ever stepped onto a court.
For Jordan, this should be an easy 2. Kaboom!
But the veterans weren't ready to hand him anything. In Jordan's first All-Star appearance, something happened that became one of the most debated stories in league history at the time. The word was that Isiah Thomas, Magic Johnson, and George Gervin orchestrated a freeze-out, making sure the ball never found Jordan during the game. He played 22 minutes and only took 9 shots, finishing with 7 points. Whether it was coordinated or just veteran players establishing the pecking order, Jordan understood the message. The first game back after All-Star break against Detroit, he scored 49 points. And don't worry, he was filing everything away. Hakeem Olajuwon and Ralph Sampson in Houston were a genuine force. The Towers concept gave the Rockets a matchup problem that almost nobody could solve. Sampson could step out and shoot. Olajuwon was already showing flashes of the most technically gifted center the game had ever seen. And together, they made Houston one of the most intriguing teams in the Western Conference heading into the playoffs. And as y'all know, Boston was still the best team in basketball on paper, winning 63 games and only losing 19. Bird was having a season that defied comprehension. In March, he scored 60 points against Atlanta, breaking the franchise record he himself had just set 9 days earlier when McHale scored 56. Bird, in response to his teammates setting a record, went out and scored 60.
Larry Bird scored 60. It is the greatest shooting exhibition I've ever seen in my life.
That was the kind of competitive craziness the Celtics had in their building. The starting 5 of Bird, Parrish, McHale, Dennis Johnson, and Danny Ainge all played over 2,500 minutes that season. The bench barely mattered because Casey Jones never needed it. Now in New York, Bernard King was in the middle of the greatest scoring run of his career, averaging nearly 33 points a game and looking like one of the most unstoppable offensive forces in the East. Then in the final week of the regular season, King ruptured his ACL. He would be gone for 2 full seasons. One of the most gifted scorers in the game, erased at his peak.
Will we ever see this Bernard King again? Can that knee ever hold up another superstar? Only one man has the answer. Only one man can predict.
The San Diego Clippers relocated to Los Angeles, giving the city two NBA teams sharing the same division. It was a strange arrangement, and it didn't make either franchise particularly happy. All-Star Weekend at the Hoosier Dome in Indy featured the slam dunk contest won by Dominique Wilkins of Atlanta, a player who is becoming one of the most spectacular athletes the sport had ever seen above the rim. The human highlight film was announcing himself, but the West won the All-Star game 140 to 129, and Ralph Sampson took MVP honors, a nod to what the Towers were doing in Houston. In the playoffs, the Lakers rolled. They swept their way through Phoenix and Portland and then handled Denver in 5 in the Western Conference Finals. Boston took care of Cleveland, Detroit, and Philadelphia in the East to set up the rematch the entire country wanted. Celtics versus Lakers again. Bird versus Magic again. But this time, it started differently. Game 1 at Boston Garden was played on Memorial Day. The Celtics won 148 to 114. It became known immediately and permanently as the Memorial Day Massacre. Scott Wedman came off the bench and made all 11 shots that he had attempted, including 4 three-pointers. He didn't miss a single one. Kareem had 12 points and 3 rebounds and looked every bit of his 38 years. Pat Riley said afterwards, "We've been buried before, but we've never had dirt thrown in our faces."
And they deserve a lot of credit. We'll be back, you know. If a 7-game series can be decided in one game, then it would be over with, but there's going to be 6 more basketball.
Kareem went to each of his teammates the next morning and apologized personally. Then he asked Riley if his father could ride the team bus to game 2. Pat Riley, of course, made an exception. And after that, Kareem went out and scored 30 points with 17 rebounds, 8 assists, and 3 blocks. He looked like he was 28, not 38. Red Auerbach had dismissed him after game 1, saying the Celtics didn't even need to double team him anymore. Those words hung in the air for the rest of the series. Kareem didn't forget a single one of them. The Lakers won 4 of the next 5 games and closed it out in game 6 on the parquet floor of the Boston Garden. It was the first time in NBA Finals history that a visiting team had ever won a championship in that building.
LA comes to Boston and wins the world title.
Kareem even managed to score 29 points in the clinching game. He was named Finals MVP at 38 years old, the oldest in league history. He had first won the honor in 1971 when he was still known as Lou Alcindor. 14 years between Finals MVPs. Kareem later called it the personal high point of his entire career. For the Lakers, this was the exorcism of everything, of 1984, of every finals loss in franchise history to Boston. Magic had come back from Tragic Johnson with a championship, and the debt from the previous June had been paid in full, collected on the parquet floor of the building they hated most. Riley had taken his team from the lowest moment in his coaching tenure to the summit in a single year. They hadn't just beaten Boston, they had beaten them where it hurt most. For the Celtics, this loss stung in a way that the previous year's win couldn't fully cover. Bird apparently had struggled throughout this series with a sore right hand that turned out to be the result of a fight with a Boston bartender. A detail that had emerged later and explained his shooting numbers dropping off sharply midway through the playoffs. The dynasty was still intact. They had won 63 games in the regular season, but Los Angeles had finally found the answer to the question Boston had been asking for a decade. Now for the seasonal awards. Larry Bird claimed his 2nd consecutive MVP award. Michael Jordan was the unanimous Rookie of the Year. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar took home his 2nd Finals MVP. Mark Ian was recognized as Defensive Player of the Year. Kevin McHale won 6-man, and Don Nelson was honored as Coach of the Year. The 1984-85 season settled a score that had been building since 1979. Magic had his revenge. Kareem had his validation, and the Lakers had their moment on the parquet that no Boston crowd could ever take back. Meanwhile, somewhere in Chicago, a 21-year-old in red and black was writing down everything that happened at All-Star Weekend and waiting for his turn. The summer before this season belonged to one of the most controversial moments in league history, and it happened before a single game was even played. The NBA instituted its first ever draft lottery, a system designed to give every non-playoff team an equal shot at the top pick. Patrick Ewing of Georgetown was the consensus best prospect in the country, a 7-foot center who had dominated college basketball for 4 years and was considered a franchise-altering talent. 7 teams had a shot at him. David Stern reached into the glass drum on live television, pulled out an envelope, and the New York Knicks won the first pick. The moment the result was announced, the whisper started. And that firm also happened to be the auditing company for the Gulf and Western, the parent company that also owned the New York Knicks. Some claimed the corner of the Knicks envelope had been deliberately creased so Stern could feel it through the drum. Others said it was frozen to make it identifiable. Nothing was ever proven, but I mean, think about it. Stern brushed it off and said, if people want to say the lottery was fixed, fine. Patrick Ewing himself said decades later, it might have been fixed, and I don't care. I ended up right where I was supposed to go. As y'all know, that conspiracy lives on to this day as one of the great unsettled debates in league's history. And it's also another reason why people think that the lottery is rigged today. If they were able to do it back then why not now? But that's a story for another video. Beyond Patrick Ewing, the 1985 draft had real depth. Karl Malone went 13th to Utah. a physical, relentless power forward out of Louisiana Tech who would go on to become one of the greatest scorers the game has ever seen. Chris Mullin went 7th to Golden State. Joe Dumars went 18th to Detroit, a quiet, cerebral shooting guard who became one of the most respected players of his generation. Xavier McDaniel went 4th to Seattle. The class didn't have the generational thunder of 1984, but had plenty of substance. Boston had lost to Los Angeles the previous spring, and Larry Bird had spent the entire offseason thinking about it. He came into 1985-86 with something to prove. What followed was one of the most dominant regular seasons in NBA history. The Celtics went 67-15. They went 40-1 at home, the closest any team has ever come to a perfect home season in the history of the league. Their only home loss came on December 6th against the Portland Trailblazers. Walton, the former MVP who had spent years fighting injuries, was reborn in Boston. He played 80 games and gave the Celtics a front court depth that suffocated all of their opponents. Bird averaged basically 26 points, 10 rebounds, and won his 3rd straight season MVP. He was 29 years old, and it was obvious that he was playing the best basketball of his life. What's crazy is the Los Angeles Lakers went 62-20 and were still the most entertaining team in the West. Magic and Kareem were still hooping, and Kareem was 39 years old and still producing. James Worthy was blossoming to one of the most dangerous wings in the conference. But throughout this season, they were operating in the shadow of what Boston was doing, and everybody knew it. In Atlanta, Dominique Wilkins was becoming a problem for the entire league. The human highlight film led the NBA in scoring with 30.3 points per game and was putting on individual performances that left arenas speechless. Mike Fratello had turned the Hawks from a 34-win team into a 50-win team in his 3rd year on the job. A turnaround that honestly nobody had expected, and that earned him Coach of the Year honors. Dominique was the engine and Doc Rivers was running the point, and Atlanta was becoming must-watch television. Now, up in Detroit, Isiah Thomas had company now. Adrian Danley had been acquired to give the Pistons a legitimate secondary scorer. Joe Dumars was settling in as a rookie and showing the kind of defensive intelligence and offensive reliability that would define his career.
To the baseline. Maurice outside, intercepted by Dumars. Ahead to Isiah on the save.
Rick Mahorn was in the paint, making life uncomfortable for anyone who drove into the lane. The Pistons went 46-36 and made the playoffs, and the pieces were starting to align for something bigger. The bad boys weren't fully formed yet, but the blueprint was taking shape. Michael Jordan, meanwhile, had just played 3 games before breaking a bone in his left foot and missing the next 64. Chicago went 30-52. Jordan came back late into the season and pushed the Bulls into the playoffs as the 8th seed, playing 18 regular season games total. Nobody expected them to last 5 minutes against the 67-win Celtics. All-Star Weekend was held in Dallas at Reunion Arena, and it gave the league 2 moments it would be talking about for decades. First, 5'7" Spud Webb of the Atlanta Hawks entered the slam dunk contest and won it, leaping over players nearly a foot taller than him to throw down dunks that defied physics and made the entire building erupt. The crowd reaction to Webb winning was unlike anything before. In the 3-point shootout, which was held for the very first time, Larry Bird walked into the arena before the competition, looked at the other contestants while still wearing his warm-up jacket, and said, "I just want to know who's coming in second place." And then, well, he won it. He would win it again for the next 2 years. The East won the All-Star game 139-132, and Isiah Thomas took MVP honors for the 2nd time in 3 years. In the playoffs, Boston was unstoppable. They swept Chicago in the first round. But the Chicago series produced a moment that transcended the result. In Game 2 at Boston Garden, Michael Jordan, on a broken foot, playing his 19th game of the season, scored 63 points.
Jordan ties the game.
Oh, boy.
63 points, and you're looking at an all-time record.
Oh, boy.
Michael Jordan.
He was 23 years old. He went 22 for 41 from the floor and 19 for 21 from the free throw line and played 53 minutes. He broke Elgin Baylor's 24-year-old playoff scoring record. The Celtics won 135-131 in double overtime, and Boston went on to sweep. And none of that was the story. The story was what Larry Bird said afterwards. "I think it's just God disguised as Michael Jordan." He also went on to say that Michael Jordan is the most awesome player in the NBA. Boston then rolled past Atlanta in 5 games. Out west, Houston was doing something unexpected again. Ralph Sampson hit one of the most improbable shots in playoff history, a spinning off-balance jumper at the buzzer in Game 5 of the Western Conference Finals that sent the Rockets past the defending champion Lakers 4-1. Los Angeles, the team that had beaten Boston in the building a year before, was going home. Houston was going to the finals. It was a rematch of 1981, Celtics versus Rockets. Houston won games 3 and 5 to make it interesting, but the Celtics were just too deep and too experienced. Bird was magnificent through the playoffs, averaging 26 points, 9.5 rebounds, and almost 8.5 assists. In the clinching Game 6 of the Garden, Boston put it away early and never looked back. Bird took home the Finals MVP honors in front of the building that had become the epicenter of everything the decade had stood for. This championship felt like a statement, not just a title, but but a legacy. The 1985-86 Celtics are still debated as the greatest team that was ever assembled. They had 5 future Hall of Famers in the starting lineup and a 6th one coming off the bench in Walton. They dominated from October to June and never once looked vulnerable. Bird had his 3rd title and his 3rd consecutive MVP and his first Finals MVP since 1984. The dynasty was at its absolute peak. For the Rockets, they really weren't too worried about this. They knew they had their front court for the future, and all they had to do was simply build around them. And now for the Lakers, losing to Houston before even getting to the finals was a gut punch. They had been the team everyone expected to see in June, and instead, they were watching it from home. Kareem was 39, Magic was 26, the window felt like it might be narrowing, and Pat Riley knew something had to change. And of course, now for the seasonal awards. Larry Bird took home his 3rd consecutive MVP award. Patrick Ewing claimed Rookie of the Year. Larry Bird also managed to win Finals MVP. Alvin Robertson of San Antonio was named Defensive Player of the Year. Bill Walton earned 6th Man, and Mike Fratello was honored as Coach of the Year. The 1985-86 season gave the decade one of its most insane images. Bud Webb soaring over Giants in Dallas, Bird draining 3-pointers before anyone else had even stretched, and a 23-year-old in Chicago doing things to a basketball that made the greatest player of his generation invoke God. The Celtics raised their 16th banner and never looked back.
But, we know it's going to be tough. If we keep on working hard, maybe we can do it again.
Larry, when will you pick up a basketball again and shoot it?
At least 2 or 3 weeks now. After this, boy, it's going to be 2 or 3 weeks.
Before any basketball was played, the summer of 1986 delivered the most devastating offseason news in league history. 2 days after the Boston Celtics selected Len Bias with the 2nd overall pick in the 1986 draft, Bias tragically passed away. He was 22 years old. The plan had been for him to be the next cornerstone of the franchise, the player who would carry Boston forward when Bird, Parrish, and McHale could no longer do it. Danny Ainge said he had just seen him at a Reebok party hours before. Bird called it the cruelest thing he has ever heard. The dynasty that had just won its 3rd championship in 6 years had been counting on its future arriving in June. That future was gone overnight. There were still some interesting guys who came out of that 86 draft. Brad Daugherty went 1st overall to Cleveland, a skilled center who would anchor the franchise for years. Ron Harper went 8th. For Los Angeles, the summer was about reinforcement. Pat Riley had watched Boston win 67 games and go wire to wire as the best team in basketball, and he understood that the Lakers needed more depth at center to protect an aging Kareem. They acquired Michael Thompson from San Antonio mid-season the year prior and now had him fully integrated. Kareem had turned 40 during the playoffs. He was the greatest scorer in league history and still a force, but the burden of carrying the interior was being redistributed in ways that made the entire offense more dangerous, not less. The Los Angeles Lakers walked into the season with a specific assignment from Riley. Magic Johnson was being asked to score more than he ever had. Riley wanted the offense to run through Magic's creation rather than through the half-court sets built around Kareem. And Magic responded with one of the greatest individual seasons a player had ever produced. He led the league in assists for the 4th time while simultaneously putting up a career high in scoring and was the unanimous choice for MVP, ending Larry Bird's 3-year stranglehold on the award. The Lakers went 65-17, the best record in the league, and were operating at a level of sustained excellence that made the building feel electric every single night. Boston went 59-23 and was still the standard in the East, but they were doing it with far less than the previous year. Bill Walton only played 10 games before his body broke down again. Scott Wedman barely played. Casey Jones was running his starting 5 into the ground because there was nothing behind him anymore. Bird was still magnificent and became the first player in NBA history to join the 50-40-90 club, shooting 50% from the field, 40% from 3, and 90% from the free throw line in the same season. But the wear was starting to show, and the shadow of what happened in June hung over the franchise all year. And in Chicago, Michael Jordan had arrived, fully healthy, fully unleashed, and with absolutely no ceiling in sight.
Jordan goes in for a dunk, and he jams it over J.B. Carroll, and that's what I'm talking about. When he dunks over the top of people, he went left side, right-handed, and rammed it over J.B.
He scored 3,000 points in the regular season, only the 2nd player in NBA history to do so, joining Wilt Chamberlain. He averaged 37.1 points per game, began a 7-year reign as the scoring champion tied with Chamberlain for the league record, and was becoming something the sport had never quite processed before. Chicago won 40 games. Jordan was doing it with very little around him, and, well, he didn't care, because he, along with the Chicago Bulls, they were coming. Julius Erving announced that this would be his final NBA season. The man who had redefined what a basketball player could look like in the air, who had given Philadelphia its championship in 1983, he was retiring. Every arena in the league gave him a tribute when the Sixers came into town. The New Jersey Nets retired his number 32 while he was still an active player, the only time in league history that ever happened. Dr. J took his final bow with a class and grace that had defined everything he ever did.
I love you. Fans, forever and a day, thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Detroit was emerging as the team that nobody wanted to face. Isiah Thomas was one of the most dangerous players in the game. Joe Dumars was becoming one of the best defensive guards in the conference. Adrian Dantley was scoring. Bill Laimbeer was making everyone's life miserable. Rick Mahorn was enforcing. Dennis Rodman was coming off the bench and doing things defensively that made coaches stop their film sessions to rewind and watch again. The Pistons went 52-30 and were heading into the playoffs with a kind of physical nastiness that made teams dread playing them. But before that, we got to talk about the All-Star Weekend that was held in Seattle. This is where Michael Jordan won his first slam dunk contest with a performance that put his coronation as the face of the league's next era on the national stage. He took off from the free throw line and hung in the air for what felt like minutes. He finished with a perfect score that sent the building into chaos. Larry Bird won the three-point shootout for the second consecutive year, again barely breaking a sweat. And the West won the game 154-149 in overtime, with Seattle's Tom Chambers taking MVP honors to the delight of the home crowd. In the playoffs, Los Angeles was dominant from the opening round, sweeping Denver and dispatching Golden State before sweeping Seattle in the Western Conference Finals. The fast break was running in overdrive. Magic was everywhere. The Lakers were simply operating on a different level than everyone else in the West. In the East, things were messier and much more brutal. Boston swept Chicago in the first round and then survived Milwaukee in 7 games.
The Celtics have won another 7th game at home.
Then found themselves in a war with the Detroit Pistons that nobody was going to forget. Game 3 of the Eastern Conference Finals saw Bird and Bill Laimbeer ejected for fighting. Robert Parrish was suspended for Game 6 after punching Laimbeer in the face. Boston was flat out falling apart physically. They pushed it to Game 5 with the series tied 2-2, but Detroit led 107-106 in the final seconds with the ball and what appeared to be a certain trip to the finals in their grasp. And, well, oh boy.
Disparity in the call. They're going to give the ball to Detroit. Bird steals it. Johnson, layup, Boston, 1 second left.
Isiah Thomas stood at half court with his hands on his knees. The Pistons went home, Boston went to the finals. By the time the 1987 NBA Finals began, the Celtics were drained from relying heavily on their starters. Los Angeles was rested, healthy, deep. The Lakers won the first 2 games in Los Angeles. Boston won Game 3. Game 4 at the Garden became one of the most dramatic games in finals history. The Celtics led by 16 at halftime. The Lakers chipped away all game. And with 30 seconds left, tied at 103, Boston responded and went back up 106-105 with 7 seconds remaining. Lakers ball, out of bounds near the sideline. Magic took the inbound pass from Michael Cooper and did something nobody expected.
5 seconds to go. Magic with a hook shot, scores with 2.
Lakers 107, Celtics 106. Magic Johnson ended up calling this move his junior sky hook as a nod to Kareem's signature weapon. Bird said afterwards that you expect to lose to the Lakers on a sky hook. You just don't expect it to be from Magic.
And the Lakers have won in Pat Riley, and the Lakers dance off the court.
Los Angeles closed it out in Game 6. Magic Johnson averaged 26 points, 13 assists, and 8 rebounds for the series and won his 3rd Finals MVP. For Magic and the Lakers, this was personal in a different way than 1985. They hadn't just beaten Boston. They had beaten them at their best, on their home floor, in the kind of series that separates great teams from legendary ones. Magic was the best player in the world. Riley had built something that could win in any fashion on any floor. The franchise had 4 championships in 8 years and was still not finished.
It was a total team effort, really. You know, we all just chipped in and just got the job done, and it's just great to be a champ again.
For Boston, however, this was the end of something. Bird knew it. His back was beginning to cause the kind of pain that would only get worse. The bench was gone. Walton was gone. The piece they had drafted to keep the dynasty going had tragically been taken away before he ever played a minute. This was the last time these 2 teams would meet on the game's biggest stage for 21 years. The greatest rivalry of the decade ended right here, with Magic's hook floating over Bird's reach in a building that had seen everything. And now for the seasonal awards. Magic Johnson was voted the league's MVP. Chuck Person claimed Rookie of the Year. Magic also added the Finals MVP. Michael Cooper took home Defensive Player of the Year. Ricky Pierce earned 6th Man, and Mike Schuler was Coach of the Year. The 1986-87 season was Magic Johnson's defining moment. Bird had owned the first half of the decade. Magic answered in the second. The Celtics and Lakers had defined everything for 8 years, and they had just played their last chapter together. But the league wasn't going to slow down and wait for a new rivalry to form on its own. Out in Detroit, the bad boys weren't just knocking at the door anymore. They were knocking it down. The day after winning the 1987 championship, Pat Riley walked up to a microphone and guaranteed the Lakers would repeat.
And I'm guaranteeing everybody here, next year we're going to win it again. Now you know I'm really crazy.
No NBA team had won back-to-back titles since the Celtics in '69. The talent pool had spread. The league had expanded. The conventional wisdom was that repeating had become nearly impossible. Riley didn't care about conventional wisdom. He put it on record. publicly, with everyone watching. Before any of that could be resolved on the court, the summer brought a draft class that would complete one of the most important rosters the sport had ever seen. San Antonio selected David Robinson first overall, a 7'1" Navy officer who wouldn't be able to suit up for the Spurs for 2 full years due to his military commitment. Seattle took Scottie Pippen 5th overall and then traded him to Chicago on draft night. Horace Grant went 10th to the Bulls as well. In a single evening, Jerry Krause had surrounded Michael Jordan with the 2 players who would help him build a dynasty. Nobody fully understood what had just happened. Reggie Miller also went 11th to Indiana. Mark Jackson went 18th to New York. Kenny Smith landed in Sacramento. The Los Angeles Lakers entered the season as defending champions with one mission. Riley shifted the scoring load further onto Byron Scott and James Worthy, giving Kareem room to operate more selectively as he aged. The results were immediate. Los Angeles went 62-20 and had the best record in the league. Showtime was still running at full speed, and the only real question was whether anybody could stop them. Michael Jordan made that question more complicated. He became the first player in NBA history to win MVP and DPOY in the same season. He had added the scoring title on top of it. Jordan was 25 years old, with Pippen and Grant now beside him, and the Bulls went 50-32. Chicago was not a finals contender yet, but the gap was closing faster than anyone had expected.
Oakley outlet to Jordan. What a move. Over Barkley. Win streak going. And here's Michael finishing it off. He gets major yeast on this one.
Detroit went 54-28 and won the Central Division. The bad boys were fully formed now. Isiah Thomas was unreal. Joe Dumars was becoming one of the best two-way guards in basketball. Y'all already know what Bill Laimbeer, Dennis Rodman, and Rick Mahorn were doing, but if you don't... And Chuck Daly had built a system around physicality and collective will that made the Pistons genuinely terrifying to play against.
Played them boys from the Pistons. Call your family, tell them you love them, and goodbye. Because there was a chance you wasn't going to make it out. They were trying to hurt people.
Pete Maravich, one of the most gifted offensive players in the history of the game, passed away on January 5th during a pickup basketball game in Pasadena. He was 40 years old. The Utah Jazz honored him with a patch bearing his number 7 for the rest of the season. The league also awarded 4 expansion franchises this season to Charlotte, Miami, Minneapolis, and Orlando. The NBA was growing in ways that even the optimists hadn't predicted at the start of this decade. All-Star Weekend was held at Chicago Stadium, and it delivered one of the most memorable nights in the history of the event. The dunk contest had built towards this rematch for 3 years. Michael Jordan against Dominique Wilkins, the human highlight film against his airness. In front of a building full of 18,000 people who had grown up watching Jordan define what flight actually meant, the 2 best dunkers on the planet traded blows for an entire evening. Wilkins threw down windmills and tomahawks that should have won any other dunk contest in any other city. He threw down a 2-handed windmill on his final dunk that shook the backboard and left the crowd momentarily stunned.
And the judges have awarded Dominique Wilkins a 45. That's incredible.
The judges gave him a 45. Jordan then ran the full length of the court, launched from the free throw line on Dr. J's advice, hung in the air with a ball cocked behind his head, and slammed it home. Most people in that building thought Wilkins deserved it. Jordan ended up winning.
They gave him a 50. They gave Jordan a 50. He defends his championship.
It's still one of the greatest dunk contests ever held. Jordan also went on to win All-Star Game MVP in front of his home crowd, and the East beat the West 138-133. In the playoffs, the Lakers carved through the West but needed 7 games against Utah and 7 more against Dallas before finally reaching the finals. They were tired and they knew it. Detroit blew past Washington and Chicago before finally ending Boston's dynasty in 6 games in the Eastern Conference Finals. The Pistons were going to the NBA Finals for the first time since the franchise moved to Detroit. This was the moment Chuck Daly had been building towards. Game 1 of the finals of the Forum was all Detroit. Adrian Dantley scored 34 points on 14 for 16 shooting. Isiah Thomas stole Kareem's inbound pass at half court with 4 seconds left in the first half and launched the three-pointer that hit nothing but net at the buzzer.
Thomas goes for 3 again. Isiah hits a 3.
Detroit led 57-40 at the break and won 105-93. The Pistons had walked into Showtime's house and treated it like a scrimmage.
You're not going to win it offensively. You've got to get to work everybody defensively. That's what I'm looking at. I got to have the defense.
Los Angeles steadied themselves and won Game 2. The series went back and forth, tight, physical, and exhausting, all the way to Game 6 back at the Forum with the Pistons holding a 3-2 series lead. What Isiah Thomas did in Game 6 was one of the most remarkable individual performances in finals history. With Detroit down 8 points in the third quarter, he took over. He scored 14 straight Piston points, layups, jumpers, and bank shots in every variety. He had the building confused about how to even respond. While driving to assist the Joe Dumars basket, he rolled his right ankle badly enough that he had to be helped off the floor. He could barely walk. The Pistons were down 8 again with under 4 minutes left in the third. He came back out, hobbling, hopping on one leg, his ankle already ballooning inside his shoe. Isiah scored 11 of Detroit's final 15 points of the quarter on 11 of 13 shooting. He finished the period with 25 points, an NBA Finals record for a single quarter that still stands today.
Out there, watch him limping on that right foot.
What a gutty, courageous performance. 25 points in the quarter by Isiah Thomas.
He ended the night with 43 points, 8 assists, and 6 steals, all on a foot that he could barely put any weight on. The Pistons led 102-101 with 14 seconds left. Detroit was 14 seconds away from the promised land. Then the whistle blew. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar went for a skyhook on the right baseline. Bill Laimbeer had his hands raised straight above his head, not even contesting the shot, clearly trying not to give away a foul in the dying seconds. The replay showed that Laimbeer's chest may have barely grazed Kareem as he went up, if it made any contact at all. The referee called a foul, Laimbeer's 6th. He fouled out. This was famously named as the Phantom Foul Call. Kareem stepped up to the free throw line and made both free throws with the entire series on the line. Lakers 103, Detroit 102. Pistons got the ball back but couldn't get a clean look. Game 7 stayed in Los Angeles. Isiah's ankle had stiffened overnight between halves in Game 6, and he was barely functional in the second half of the deciding game. With Isiah reduced to a spectator, the Lakers took control in the third quarter and pulled away. James Worthy had the game of his life. 36 points, 16 rebounds, 10 assists. The first Game 7 triple-double in NBA Finals history. Worthy earned his nickname Big Game James in the most appropriate setting imaginable. The Lakers won 108-105, back-to-back champions. The first repeat since the 1969 Celtics. For the Lakers, this was the one that Riley had promised. Winning the first championship was expected given their talent. Winning consecutive titles while everyone was gunning for them was a different kind of achievement entirely. Magic, Kareem, Worthy, Cooper, they had done something the sport hadn't seen in nearly 2 decades. Showtime had reached its absolute peak, and for Detroit, the loss was devastating in a way that went beyond the scoreboard. They had been 14 seconds away from winning it all. And the call that took it from them was one that even the winning coach admitted looked like a phantom. The bad boys had been robbed of their moment, or at least that's how it felt. Chuck Daly knew exactly what this team was capable of, and so did everybody else. Detroit would be back, and next time, there would be no phantom foul to save anyone. And now for the seasonal awards. Michael Jordan claimed his first ever MVP. Mark Jackson earned Rookie of the Year. James Worthy took home Finals MVP. Michael Jordan was the Defensive Player of the Year. Ricky Pierce won Sixth Man, and Doug Moe was Coach of the Year. The 1987-88 season confirmed what Pat Riley had promised and what the rest of the league had feared. The Lakers were the standard, but coming out of Detroit, a team full of bad intentions and unfinished business was preparing to burn it all down. Before training camp even opened, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar made an announcement that hung over the entire season from October to June. This would be his last year. 20 seasons, 6 MVPs, 6 championships, the all-time scoring record. A career so long and so dominant that the league decided to honor him in every single city he visited. Every arena on the schedule staged a tribute when the Lakers had come to town. Opponents who had spent years trying to stop him stood up and applauded. It was a farewell tour unlike anything the sport had ever seen, and the Lakers were determined to make sure it ended with a ring. The 1988 draft class that arrived headed into the season was not one anyone was going to remember fondly. Danny Manning went first overall to the Clippers, a supremely gifted forward who led Kansas to a national championship and was considered a sure thing. He ended up tearing his ACL his rookie season and was never quite the same player afterwards. Mitch Richmond went 5th to Golden State and immediately announced himself as a legitimate star, winning Rookie of the Year with a breathtaking debut season that gave the Warriors a backcourt weapon they hadn't had in years. Hershey Hawkins, Dan Marley, and Rex Chapman also came out of this class. This was also the first season for the Charlotte Hornets and the Miami Heat. The Hornets showed up in teal and immediately captured a city that had been starved for professional basketball. The craziest part about this is that the Miami Heat were placed in the Western Conference despite being geographically located in the East. They ended up going 0-17 to start the season, the worst opening stretch in league history, before finishing the season out 15-67. Expansion is never pretty. The Detroit Pistons moved into their gleaming new Palace of Auburn Hills, leaving the cavernous Silverdome behind, and immediately felt at home in a building built specifically for them. Chuck Daly had his team loose and locked in, but something wasn't quite clicking in the locker room. The chemistry between Adrian Dantley and the rest of the roster had been quietly fraying for months. 3 days after All-Star Weekend, Detroit made a trade that shocked almost everybody. They sent Adrian Dantley and a first-round pick to Dallas for Mark Aguirre, one of the most gifted offensive players in the game and a childhood friend of Isiah Thomas. The basketball world was skeptical. Aguirre had a reputation for selfishness and inconsistency. The Pistons went out and posted a 63-19 record the rest of the way, the best in the league. Chuck Daly had been right. Sometimes chemistry is more important than just talent. The Los Angeles Lakers went 57-25 and swept through the Western Conference playoffs without losing a single game. 11-0 headed into the finals. Magic Johnson won his second MVP award.
If he doesn't have anybody open. Here comes Magic. He's got it. He throws it on the way for three. Good!
The fairy tale ending for Kareem was very well possible. A three-peat. One last championship. A perfect ending to the most decorated career the sport had ever produced. I know you guys are probably wondering, but Larry Bird's body had finally given out. Heel spurs so severe that he played just 6 games all season. The first 6, before shutting it down entirely. The Celtics, who had not won fewer than 57 games in the previous 9 seasons, limped to just 42 wins. Bird was just 32 years old and was in the prime of his career, but his feet wouldn't allow him to continue. And watching the dynasty dissolve in a single season was a somber reminder of how fragile greatness can truly be. Phoenix was one of the biggest surprise stories of the year. Kevin Johnson, a young point guard who had arrived from Sacramento, was playing at an all-star level. Tom Chambers had been signed as a free agent and was scoring at will. Cotton Fitzsimmons had the Suns winning 55 games and playing with an energy and pace that made them one of the most entertaining teams in the West. The Cavaliers were building something real. Mark Price was one of the most efficient point guards in the league. Brad Daugherty was a legitimate low post force. Larry Nance anchored the front court. Ron Harper was electric on the wing. The Cavaliers went 57-25 and were one of the most underrated teams in the conference. A sleeping giant that would soon wake up and collide with something they had no answer for. John Stockton in Utah set the all-time single season assist record with 13.8 per game. He also led the league in steals. Karl Malone was becoming one of the most unstoppable power forwards the game had ever seen. Jerry Sloan had just taken over from Frank Layden, who burned out and resigned 17 games into the season. And the Jazz were building the foundation of something that would define the next decade. This was also the time that TNT began airing NBA games, sharing cable broadcast rights alongside TBS. The league was on more screens than ever, reaching audiences it hadn't touched before. David Stern was transforming the sport into a global product, and the viewership numbers reflected it. All-Star Weekend was held at the Astrodome in Houston, the first time the game had been played in a baseball venue. Karl Malone put on a dominant performance and took home All-Star Game MVP honors. Dale Ellis of Seattle won the three-point shootout, the first year Larry Bird hadn't won it since the contest began. Bird's absence from even the weekend events underscored how much the season had already lost without him. In the playoffs, Detroit swept Boston in the first round and then swept Milwaukee, rolling through the East with a kind of controlled fury that made opponents feel like they were being dismantled rather than just beaten. Then came the Chicago Bulls. Michael Jordan and the Bulls had grown. Scottie Pippen was no longer a rookie experiment. Horace Grant was developing into a legitimate two-way forward. And before they ran into the Pistons, we got to talk about the shot. And if you were around back then, you know exactly what I'm referring to. This was a best-of-5 series tied 2-2, and with just 3 seconds left, Cleveland took a 100-99 lead on a driving layup by Craig Elo. Doug Collins drew up a play that nobody could have ever guessed in a million years.
Puts the shot in the air. Good! The game's over, and the Bulls have won.
It wasn't just a shot, it was the shot. Chicago won 2 of the first 3 games against the Pistons and had the defending conference champions genuinely concerned. Detroit responded by engineering something that would become infamous. The Jordan rules, a defensive scheme designed specifically around Jordan, built to make him pay physically for every drive, to funnel him towards help defenders, to make the rest of the Bulls beat him. It worked. Detroit ended up winning 3 straight and reached the NBA Finals for the 2nd year straight. Los Angeles was there waiting for the rematch. Byron Scott pulled his hamstring in practice the day before Game 1. He wouldn't play. The Lakers absorbed the news and went out for Game 1 anyway. Detroit won 109-97. Magic strained his left hamstring driving to the basket and had to come out of the game. He tried to return, but his body refused. He was ultimately done for the series. The Lakers are now going up against the bad boys without their starting backcourt. James Worthy was magnificent in a losing effort, while Kareem at 42 years old found something remarkable in himself for one last stand, contributing 24 points and 13 rebounds on what the building sensed might be his final great performance. Joe Dumars scored 31 and also dropped 17 consecutive points at one point in the third quarter of Game 3 by himself. Detroit won. Game 4 was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's last. He scored 7 points. He missed all 6 of his final sky hooks. The building gave him a standing ovation when he came off of the floor for the final time. Detroit closed it out 105-97. The sweep was complete. For the better part of a decade, the NBA had been a two-city story. You were either watching the Lakers or watching the Celtics, and watching everyone else just filling out the bracket until June arrived. The league liked it that way. The networks liked it that way. And for a long time, it looked like nothing was going to change it. Detroit didn't care. The city had been through decades of economic devastation by the time the bad boys had arrived. The auto industry had collapsed. Unemployment had gutted entire neighborhoods. This was not a city that had been handed anything. And then Chuck Daly built a basketball team in its city's image. Hard and mean and physical. A team that genuinely did not care whether you liked watching them. They were booed in every building in the league and used every bit of it as fuel. The fans understood them immediately. When the Pistons swept the Lakers, the city erupted in a way it hadn't in decades. A franchise that had never won a championship in Detroit had done it by walking into the house of the most celebrated dynasty of the era and sweeping them off the floor. Isiah Thomas stood on the court and cried. He had been to 2 finals and left with nothing the first time. He had played on one leg in the previous year's series and watched the Phantom Foul give the Lakers new life. He had been dismissed at every turn, and he won. The city threw a parade that brought over 1 million people into the streets of downtown Detroit. 1 million people in a city the country had been writing obituaries for. They came out for the bad boys because the bad boys were them. Tough, unbothered, and impossible to push around. And now, the best in the world. In case you couldn't tell, I'm a Pistons fan. For the Lakers, this was the end of the Showtime era. Kareem was gone. Pat Riley would leave the following season. The franchise that had defined the decade with 5 championships in 9 years would spend the next several years rebuilding. Magic remained, brilliant and fierce, but the cast that made Showtime into a cultural institution was dissolving. They had been the team of the decade, and now the decade was over. Every single NBA Finals in the 1980s featured either the Los Angeles Lakers or the Boston Celtics. The two franchises had combined to win 8 out of the 10 championships. And now, in the final season of the decade, Detroit had finally broken that door down and walked right through it. And for the final time, the seasonal awards. Magic Johnson won his 2nd MVP award. Mitch Richmond claimed Rookie of the Year. Joe Dumars earned Finals MVP. Mark Eaton was recognized as Defensive Player of the Year. Eddie Johnson took home 6th Man, and Cotton Fitzsimmons was honored as Coach of the Year. The 1980s NBA was unlike anything before and unlike anything that came after it. It was the decade that saved the league, that turned a struggling product into a global phenomenon, that gave the sport its 2 greatest ambassadors in Bird and Magic, and then, just as that era was closing, introduced the world to something it had never quite seen before. 10 years, 5 different champions, a dynasty in Boston, a dynasty in Los Angeles, and a city in Detroit that crashed the party and refused to leave. David Stern turned a league that was airing its biggest games of the season on tape delay into the most marketed sports product on the planet. The dunk contest became must-see television. Rivalries were real and the stakes felt enormous every single night. And the kid from North Carolina, well, he was just getting started. The 90s were coming, and with them, something that made everything that happened in this decade looks like sort of a warm-up act. If you want to see how the rest of the story unfolds, it's a good thing we got all of the next decade recaps on this channel, from the 90s to the 2000s to the 2010s and even the 2020s. Every era, every rivalry, every moment that made you fall in love with the sport. It's all here. But for now, the 1980s belong to the players who lived them, and what a decade it was. If you enjoyed this one, please be sure to hit that like button and please, please, please subscribe. And if you've got some extra time on your hands, I think you'll love the videos that are on the screen right now. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.